The Hidden Legacy is a channel where every story uncovers secrets buried beneath love, family, and destiny. Here, we bring you tales of resilience, romance, betrayal, and second chances, crafted to touch your heart and keep you hooked until the very end. If you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and surprise, you're in the right place. Don't just watch. Be part of our growing family. Hit subscribe now and never miss a story that could change the way you see life. The storm rolled in from the Atlantic like a restless giant, lashing against the quiet coastal town of Portsmouth. On nights like this, David Miller usually kept to himself, reading a book by the fireplace, while his 9-year-old son, Ethan, sketched in his notebook. But fate rarely announces itself politely. Sometimes it appears in the most unexpected form. That evening, headlights swept across the deserted road and revealed a haunting figure. A woman in a soaked wedding dress, barefoot, her hair tangled by rain and wind. She looked less like a bride and more like someone fleeing a ghost that no one else could see. David should have kept driving. He knew how quickly life could unravel when you got involved in someone else's storm. But something in her eyes stopped him cold. They weren't just desperate. They carried the same emptiness he had seen in his own reflection the day Sarah, his wife, never came home again. He lowered the window. "Do you need help?" The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. And just like that, a single choice would intertwine two broken lives, setting in motion a story of love, loss, and a legacy neither of them expected to uncover. Chapter 1. The Bride in the Rain. The storm crawled in from the Atlantic like a living thing, low, snarling, and relentless. Wind bullied the pines along Sagamore Avenue, rattling their dark needles together, and the ocean hurled itself against the breakwall beyond the marina with the rhythm of an angry drum. David Miller angled his wipers to their highest setting and leaned toward the windshield, as if a few inches of proximity could force clarity from curtains of rain. He should have been home an hour ago. A last-minute call from a contractor, wrought behind a structural beam in a Victorian on Islington Street, had stretched into a quick inspection and a promise to email revised drawings in the morning. Ethan was sleeping at Mrs. Langley's next door. "It's movie night, Mr. Miller. Let him stay up too late for once," she'd insisted. So there was no bedtime to miss. Still, the empty house waited like a question he didn't always know how to answer. On nights this rough, he preferred the quiet hum of routine. Check locks, set the kettle, write notes for the morning, peek at Ethan's latest sketch stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lobster. The headlights skimmed past a reflective sign, Portsmouth Harbor, then found something that wasn't supposed to be on the road. A white shape staggering along the shoulder, luminous and wrong in the storm. David eased off the gas. The shape resolved into a woman, barefoot. A wedding dress clung to her like wet paper. The hem, shredded, dragged behind her, scooping rain and grit. She held the bodice in one hand, as if preventing herself from falling out of whatever fairy tale she'd just fled. Against a flash of lightning, her silhouette was stark, hair plastered to her neck, shoulders squared in proud defiance, chin tilted the way people tilt their chins when they've decided not to cry. He passed her by instinct. Most people would. And then his foot moved to the brake before his brain could supply reasons not to. The SUV fish-tailed slightly as he pulled onto the shoulder. He turned on the hazards. For a moment, he only listened. Rain battering metal, his pulse tick-tick-ticking inside his ears. Then he lowered the passenger side window. "Are you all right?" he called, pitching his voice above the storm. The woman stopped. She was breathing hard, the kind of hard that comes from sprinting far in formal shoes. Her eyes met his across the flood of headlight. In their pale color, he recognized something he hated recognizing in anyone: a horizons-gone feeling. He had seen it in his own bathroom mirror once, on a morning when there had still been casseroles from the neighbors in the fridge, and Ethan's questions were too gentle for a 9-year-old shouldering grief. "I'm fine," she said. It was reflex, brittle and unconvincing. "You're barefoot on Sagamore in a nor'easter," David said, not unkindly. "I don't think fine means what you think it means." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost relief that someone would break the trance with a line that human, and he took the risk. "I can take you somewhere," he said. "A gas station, the police station, somewhere dry." She glanced over her shoulder. There was nothing back there except darkness and the shiver of coastal pines. Whatever she feared or refused was out of sight now, but still chasing. She stepped closer and rain beaded across her eyelashes like sequins. "No police," she said softly. "Please." He nodded once, deciding either way wasn't safe, but letting decency be louder tonight. "There's a blanket in the back," he said. "Come on." She hesitated half a second, then opened the door and slid in. The cabin filled at once with sea air and the faint floral ghost of whatever perfume lingered in the fabric of her dress. David reached back for the old wool throw that lived behind the seats, a scratchy thing that had seen more forts and movie nights than any blanket had a right to, and handed it over. She wrapped it around her shoulders without ceremony, fingers trembling only when she lifted them away from the bodice. "Seat belt," David said, gentle out of habit. She clicked it into place. He pulled back onto the road. They drove a while in a silence that wasn't quite silence. The storm did most of the talking. Wipers thumped time. The heater, turned high, breathed warmth into her damp air. He could see the delicate embroidery on her sleeves now, threads that flashed silver when the dash lights caught them. Money, he thought, but didn't say the word. Money had its own weather. "My name's David," he offered, when the quiet risked becoming a wall instead of a shelter. A long beat. "Clara," she said. Just that. No last name. Her voice carried that faint, finished edge he recognized from summer tourists who came up from Boston in linen and soft leather shoes. "All right, Clara," he said. "Do you have somewhere you want to go?" Her hands tightened under the blanket. "Somewhere that isn't back," she said. He almost smiled at the precision of her answer. "I can manage not back. Do you want me to drop you at a hotel? There's the harbor view." "No hotels." The words came too fast, and she heard her own urgency, winced, and tried again. "Please, not where anyone would look." The old instincts pressed at him. Be careful, ask questions, think of Ethan, and the newer instincts pressed back. Be kind. Be the person you hope your son believes you are. "I have a guest room," he said. "It's dry. You can figure out your options in the morning, if that feels safer." She studied the windshield, the road beyond. Another flash broke open the sky. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, as if she needed to know the motive before she could accept the rescue. "You don't know me." "I don't," he said. "But I know what a bad night looks like." They turned onto the narrow lane that led toward his neighborhood, a pocket of modest capes and colonials, a short walk from the harbor. The roads here were familiar. The puddle that always formed outside the corner house, the way the maple near the mailbox leaned like a man with his hands in his pockets, Mrs. Langley's front porch swing that squeaked reliably on the first warm Saturday in May. He pulled into his driveway and cut the engine. Rain drummed on the roof in a frenzy and then settled, as if agreeing to wait while they figured out the rest. "Stay put a second," he said. He jogged around the hood, opened her door, and lifted the blanket higher when the wind tried to snatch it. Close up, he could see that the dress had once been exquisite, a froth of fabric and craft hours. Whatever had happened to it had been sudden, impatient, done without regard for cost. Her feet were blotched red from the cold and grit. He fought the ridiculous urge to apologize on behalf of the weather, the road, the night. Inside, the house greeted them with that small relief of a place that has been lived in. The faint lemon of floor cleaner, the honest clutter of a family. Ethan's sneakers abandoned by the stairs. A paper crown from last weekend's birthday party still perched on the newel post. David flicked on a lamp. Light pooled across the worn oak coffee table, where a mosaic of crayon marks advertised the history of kindergarten and second grade. He shrugged out of his jacket and set his keys in the bowl by the door. "You can use the bathroom down the hall," he said. "There are towels in the cabinet. I'll find you some clothes." Clara stepped over the threshold like a trespasser. Her fingers brushed the edge of a framed photograph. A boy with a serious, drawing-sharp gaze holding up a sketchbook for the camera, his thin arms slung around a woman with laughing eyes. The woman's hair was caught mid-toss by the wind, and she wore a sweater the color of early spring moss. Clara didn't ask who she was. She didn't need to. "Thank you," she said, simple as a coin placed in the right palm. David ducked into the spare room he still called the office, even though it had slowly become a museum of the life he was growing out of and the life he was growing into. Rolled plans and a three-legged stool, boxes of Ethan's baby clothes he could not yet give away, a stack of children's books waiting for the next rainy Sunday. In the back of the closet was a canvas bag labeled "Donate" in thick marker, sweaters, jeans, a pair of flannel pajama pants. He glanced at the framed picture on the dresser as he gathered the bundle. Sarah was in it, wind in her hair, that moss-green sweater. He felt the old ache move through him. Then the new kindness that sometimes followed it. The sense that loving someone who is gone had changed the shape of him in a way that made room rather than taking it away. He left the clothes and a towel outside the bathroom door. "I'll put the kettle on," he said, through the wood. "Tea or coffee?" "Tea," she said, relief buried inside the single syllable, as if ordinary requests were a kind of lifeline. The kettle began to shiver toward a whistle. In the living room, he straightened without thinking, collected a constellation of Lego from the couch, turned Ethan's sketchbook right side up on the coffee table, nudged the paper crown so it sat more securely. When he caught himself doing it, he almost laughed, as if tidying the stage could protect him from what plot twist had wandered out of the storm. Clara emerged in an oversized sweater, and sweatpants rolled at the waist, the blanket still caped across her shoulders. Damp hair curled at her jaw. Without the dress's battlefield drama, she looked younger and more human, less like a headline. She held her ruined gown as if it were a creature she had once loved and could not quite abandon to the floor. "Hang it on the shower rod," David said. "It'll drip into the tub. We'll figure it out." She nodded and vanished again, then returned with empty hands. He handed her a mug. Steam fogged the air between them. "Sugar? Honey?" he asked. She shook her head and wrapped both palms around the ceramic. For a moment, they stood like strangers, introducing themselves to a fragile truce of warmth. Rain battered the windows and ran down the glass in wavery veins. "Rules," David said finally, because rules tame chaos. 1. You call someone you trust to let them know you're safe. 2. If you need a ride somewhere in the morning, I'll drive you. 3. If you want me to take you anywhere tonight, I will. No questions. 4. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me. She swallowed. The tea must have burned. A heartbeat of pain crossed her face, and then was gone. "I can't call my parents," she said, eyes on the mug. "And I won't call him. The pronoun came dressed in velvet and handcuffs. "Friend?" David asked, a small, wry sound. "The kind I could trust at 2 in the morning are in the wedding photos." "That's an answer." He let the kettle's afterclicks fill the space. "Guest room is at the end of the hall. Fresh sheets. The door sticks if you pull instead of push." She nodded again and stood very still, like a person leaning against dignity because the furniture might not be sturdy. He recognized the exhaustion that wasn't about muscles at all. "Sit," he said, motioning to the couch. When she did, he took the chair opposite, the one with the dent that fit his shoulder perfectly from 100 late nights and 1,000 small decisions. On the coffee table, Ethan's sketchbook gaped open to a drawing of a boat battered by cartoonish waves. A figure with very specifically shaggy hair braced at the bow. A tiny speech bubble read, "We've got this." Clara followed his glance and smiled with only half her mouth. "Is that your son?" "Ethan," David said. 9 going on 40. "You're raising him alone," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "Going on 3 years. We have an excellent village." "Is that—" She hesitated, then gestured to the photo on the mantel. "Sarah," he said. Saying her name in front of strangers had been a cliff once. Now it was a hill he could climb without losing his breath. She was... He didn't complete the sentence. The storm took it and made it obvious. Clara sat with that a moment, then said, almost abruptly, "I didn't trip on the way down the aisle." He blinked at the abrupt pivot, then understood. A strange courtesy. A piece of truth offered in exchange for sanctuary. He waited. "I walked out," she said, "before the music swelled, before the doors opened. I walked out the back of St. Julian's, down the service stairs, into the alley that smelled like rain and old flower water. The driver was waiting at the front, the photographers, too. No one was waiting where the air wasn't perfumed. I took off my shoes and ran." He did not ask why. Why was the question that invited rational lists when rational lists were how people had caged her? Instead, he said, "Your feet are going to hate you tomorrow." They both smiled, startled by the ordinary cruelty of the truth. It broke a tension that might have cut skin. He stood. "I have a first aid kit," he said. "Sit tight." In the kitchen, he gathered supplies: antiseptic wipes, gauze, bandages. When he returned, Clara had tucked her feet up under the blanket as if they were secrets. She eyed the kit and shook her head. "I've seen worse," he said. Ethan once tried to build a zip line from the tree to the porch. How'd that go? Not as planned. He sat at the edge of the coffee table. May I? She considered, and then slid one foot out, hesitant. It was raw in places, grimy in others, tender under the ball. He cleaned and wrapped without commentary, hands steady, grateful for the tactility of care when conversation felt treacherous. He did the other foot. When he taped the last bandage, she exhaled a breath that sounded like surrender to gravity. Thank you, she said. After a beat, he would have hated this blanket. David glanced at the cartoon whales swimming along the wool in faded navy. Who? The man I didn't marry. She didn't say his name, but it arrived anyway, slick as a magazine cover. He didn't like whimsy. I'm pro-whimsy, David said, in moderation. She laughed then, not loudly, but genuinely, and the house noticed. Old places notice laughter. They rearrange their echoes for it. The sound passed through the hallway and brushed against the door of the room where Ethan kept his baseball glove and slid under the kitchen clock and got into the grain of the floor. Sleep, he said, the word a suggestion rather than a command. Everything is harder at 2 in the morning. And easier to do impossible things, she murmured, as if quoting someone long ago. He didn't respond to that. He only stood and motioned down the hall. In the guest room, he showed her the lamp that sometimes flickered, if you nudged the cord. The spare blanket at the foot of the bed, the stack of paperback novels on the nightstand left behind by friends who thought every house needed a mystery where the murderer was obvious. At the doorway, she paused. I'll be gone in the morning, she said, preempting an offer he hadn't made yet. I won't make this your problem. He thought of the storm, which still hammered the roof. He thought of the ruined dress and the alley that smelled like old flower water, of shoes discarded for speed, of the photo on the mantel and the boy's drawing with its ridiculous brave bubble. You're not a problem, he said. You're a person. Get some sleep, Clara. When he returned to the living room, the kettle was cool. He turned off the lamp, and the house softened into darkness. For a while he stood at the window and watched the rain. Across the fence, Mrs. Langley's porch light was a steady coin in the night. In the morning, he would text her and thank her for keeping Ethan 1 more hour than planned. Then 3, then overnight. He checked his phone now. There was a message from her. Ethan crashed after the second movie. He insisted on drawing a map of how storms work. He's fine. So are you. L, he typed, thank you. You're the best. See you at 8. Then he set the phone face down and let the quiet settle. Somewhere along the coast, the lighthouse threw its patient beam around and around, as faithful to its task as grief had been to his life, and as gentle as kindness could be on the nights it remembered the way home. He should have gone to bed. Instead, he drifted into the kitchen and opened the back door and stood under the small overhang where rain became a beaded curtain inches from his face. The garden lay in winter's mess, dead stems, collapsed trellises, the ghost grid of last year's tomatoes. Sarah had loved it anyway at this time of year. She used to say, a garden in winter is a promise you make out loud to the dirt. He hadn't kept up with promises as well lately as he wanted to. He wondered what a person does with a wedding dress the morning after it stops being a wedding dress. He wondered what Ethan would ask, and how to answer without giving fear a name it didn't deserve. When he finally turned away, the house sighed, in that way houses do when someone is walking down a hallway at night. He paused outside the guest room and listened. Not to pry, just to be sure that sleep had happened. The faintest shift of blankets, a breath, the private music of someone safe enough, for now, to rest. David went to his room and set an alarm he didn't need. On his nightstand lay a list of measurements for the old Victorian on Islington. He would draft new joist details in the morning and send the email before Ethan woke up. He lay back and closed his eyes. The storm spoke through the roof in its old language. He let it. He woke to a smaller weather. The storm was a steady rain now, the kind that is honest about ending. Coffee made the kitchen smell like competence. He set 2 mugs on the counter and a plate of toast. His cooking often began and ended in helpful increments, and hesitated only a second before adding honey to the tray. When he knocked on the guest room door and heard no answer, he opened it a few inches. Clara was sitting cross-legged on the edge of the bed in the oversized sweater, staring at the dress hung like a flag of surrender over the shower rod in the adjoining bath. Her hair was dry now, curling as if it had forgiven her. She looked not like a bride, and not like a disaster, something in between, which is to say, a person having a morning after a night. "I made coffee," he said, "and toast, because that's the kind of chef I am." She smiled, small but present. "Toast is perfect." They ate at the kitchen island like 2 travelers who had arrived at the same station by mistake. The quiet was easier now. She turned the mug in her hands as if making up her mind about something. "I should tell you who he is," she said. "You don't have to." "I know. But not telling is a kind of telling, too." She took a breath. "Lucas Harrington." The name slid into the room like mercury. Shiny, cold, familiar, because even people who didn't care about the polished class of Boston still read the paper. David didn't whistle, because whistling is rude when someone has offered you truth. He only nodded once, in the way carpenters nod when they see a beam that will need sistering. Strong, but not enough for what's coming if we don't help. "He's not dangerous," she said, as if answering the unasked. "He's relentless. He likes things the way he likes them." David thought of whimsy and blankets, of bare feet on wet asphalt, and a door that didn't stick if you pushed instead of pulled. "What do you want, Clara?" he asked, because sometimes a person needs the plain question out loud. The complicated muscles around her mouth worked through a dozen answers and rejected them in favor of the truest. "A life that belongs to me." He nodded again. "Okay, today we can make a list. Small things first. A pair of shoes, a phone charger, a plan that gets you through lunch." She laughed, and this time it reached her eyes. "And after lunch?" "After lunch," he said. "We'll decide after lunch." She looked at him for a long beat, something uncoiling in her shoulders. "You're very procedural." "I design beams," he said. "It leaks into everything." "Does it help?" "It keeps things up." He lifted his mug. "And sometimes that's enough." She glanced toward the window where the rain traced neat lines down the glass. Beyond it, the garden waited for spring and a promise. She said, almost to the window, "My grandmother had a garden. Peonies like pillows. I used to think flowers were a kind of secret map." "A hidden legacy," he said, the phrase slipping out like a stone that had been in his pocket for a while without a name. Her eyes flicked to him. "Yes," she said, surprised by how precisely the words fit. Then she exhaled, as if she had been holding breath since the first measure of the bridal march. "All right. After lunch, We can talk about gardens. And shoes, he said, practical by reflex. And shoes. She grinned. Apparently, I'm pro-whimsy now. He held her gaze, let the moment arrange itself between them with the respectful distance that new bridges require. Somewhere down the hall, a phone buzzed. Mrs. Langley, most likely, delivering a 9-year-old with a map of how storms work and 1,000 questions about the world. David set his mug down. Ethan's home in 10, he said. He's a kind audience and an honest one. I'm good with honest, Clara said. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. For the first time in a long time. In the window, the rain lightened to a veil. The lighthouse on the far edge of sight turned its patient circle, exactly as it had the night before, and every night before that. Some things, David thought, keep doing their work, whether you're ready for safe water or not. He rose to answer the knock he knew would come, and the house, his house, felt less like a question and more like an invitation. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. The Hidden Legacy. The rain softened to a gray mist by midday, but inside the Miller house, the air felt brighter than the weather outside. Ethan's sneakers squeaked across the hardwood as he bounded through the door, cheeks flushed from the damp chill and from Mrs. Langley's enthusiastic scolding about forgetting his umbrella. "Dad!" he called, slamming the door too hard before remembering the rule. "Sorry." His eyes landed on Clara at the kitchen island. She was halfway through, buttering a second piece of toast. Sleeves of David's oversized sweater rolled past her elbows, hair loose in a halo of damp curls. For a moment, Ethan froze. Clara smiled gently. "Hi." The boy blinked. His gaze darted to David as if to ask for confirmation that this wasn't a dream. Or worse, some new adult plan he hadn't been told about. David rubbed the back of his neck. "Ethan, this is Clara. She's a friend. She needed a ride last night, and now she's going to rest here for a while." "Just for a while," Clara echoed quickly, though the words carried a trace of uncertainty. Ethan studied her with the frankness only children possessed. His silence stretched long enough to become awkward. Then he pulled out a chair and dropped his backpack onto the floor. "Do you like pancakes?" Clara blinked, caught off guard. Yes, very much." Ethan nodded. "Okay, then you can stay." He reached for the last slice of toast without waiting for an answer. David hid a laugh in his coffee mug. Clara's lips curved despite herself. The air eased. Later, when Ethan disappeared upstairs to dig out his latest sketch for show and tell, David leaned against the counter. "You've been evaluated. Congratulations. You passed." Clara shook her head. "He reminds me of my younger cousin. Quiet, but sharp. Always watching." Her voice softened. "He seems happy." David's mouth twitched. "He wasn't. Not for a long time. But he's learning again." His eyes met hers. "And maybe so am I." A silence hummed between them. Clara broke it first, brushing crumbs from her lap. "I should really get out of your way. Maybe find a bus. Figure out where I'm going next." "Clara." David set his mug down. "You don't have to decide everything today. Stay until the storm clears. After that, if you want, I'll drive you anywhere you need to go." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion pinned her protest. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." That evening, the three of them sat around the small dining table. David reheated leftover chowder, apologizing for its simplicity, while Ethan animatedly described his latest drawing, a lighthouse that doubled as a spaceship. Clara listened, nodding with real interest, asking questions that made Ethan's eyes shine. For the first time in months, David noticed, his son laughed without forcing it. The sound loosened something in his chest. But when Ethan went to bed, Clara lingered by the window, her reflection superimposed against the drizzle outside. "He's wonderful," she said softly. "He is." David hesitated. "But?" Clara's shoulders tightened. "But I don't belong here. This feels good, too good, and good things don't last for me." David stepped closer but kept respectful distance. Maybe this time they could. Sometimes you just need the right place to start again. She turned, her eyes catching his. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. Then Clara laughed quietly, though it sounded more like breaking. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't," David admitted. "But simple doesn't mean impossible." That night, Clara lay awake in the guest room, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. Rain tapped softly against the glass. In her mind, the echoes of her past life clawed back. The pressure of her parents' expectations, Lucas's commanding voice, the suffocating weight of wealth disguised as security. But beneath it all, another echo stirred. Ethan's laughter, David's quiet steadiness, the warmth of toast and tea in a kitchen that smelled like home. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to wonder, what if I stayed? And for the first time, the question didn't terrify her. Chapter 3. The Confrontation. The storm broke fully overnight. By morning, the sun pressed against the curtains, turning the edges of the house golden. Clara had drifted into a shallow, uncertain sleep, but the warmth in the guest room had made it bearable. She awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Ethan humming in the kitchen. For a fragile moment, everything felt normal. Too normal. By midday, Clara had begun to believe the fragile peace might last longer than a day. She helped Ethan with his art project, laughed when David tried to whisk pancake batter but splattered the counter, and even allowed herself to imagine the rhythm of this household continuing beyond tomorrow. But just before dusk, the illusion shattered. Engines purred outside. Low, expensive, unmistakably out of place in the quiet Portsmouth neighborhood. David's shoulders stiffened as he looked through the front window. Two sleek black SUVs and a silver Bentley lined the curb. He didn't need to be told who it was. Clara froze, color draining from her face. Her hands tightened on the dish towel until her knuckles whitened. "He found me." David's jaw set. "Stay here." The knock was deliberate, not frantic. A knock that expected obedience. David opened the door, squaring his frame in the doorway. "Mr. Miller," said Lucas Harrington. Impeccably dressed, tall, and radiating the kind of confidence only power and money could purchase, he smiled thinly. "I believe you have something of mine." David didn't move. "People don't belong to people." Lucas's expression sharpened. "Victoria is having a breakdown. Her parents are worried sick. She's not thinking clearly. I've come to take her home." "Home?" David asked evenly. "Or back into the cage you built?" A flicker of irritation crossed Lucas's face. "You don't understand. She has responsibilities, obligations. She can't just disappear in the middle of—" "She can," David cut in, voice low but steady. "If that's what she chooses." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Who are you, anyway? A widower scraping by with a son? What could you possibly offer her?" He gestured toward the modest home behind David. "This? A life of mediocrity? She deserves more." David met his gaze without flinching. She deserves freedom and a life she chooses for herself, not one bought for her. Victoria! Lucas's voice boomed past David into the house. Come here, now! Clara appeared in the hallway, Ethan clutching her hand. She looked pale but resolute, chin lifted. Hello, Lucas, she said, voice calm but cutting. Lucas's face softened for show. Thank God. You've had everyone worried. Let's go home. We'll fix this. No, Clara said. The single syllable cracked the air like lightning. Lucas blinked, thrown off by her composure. Don't be dramatic. You're 32, not a rebellious teenager. We have a future together, a home, security, everything you could want. You mean everything you want, Clara replied. I was just expected to play the part. His mask slipped. I gave you everything. Wealth, status, a place in society. What more could you want? Clara's voice trembled, but her words didn't. To matter. To be more than an accessory on your arm. David stepped beside her, his presence solid as an anchor. I think you should leave. Lucas's eyes narrowed, darting between them. I see what's happening. You think you can play house with my fiancé, but without me, Victoria is nothing. No money, no protection, no future. Then it's a good thing I'm not with you for your money, Clara said, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. Lucas's mask hardened into something colder. You'll regret this. Both of you. When reality sets in, when you realize what you've given up, you'll come crawling back. And I might not be so forgiving next time. He turned sharply, signaling his men. Engines roared to life, and within seconds the driveway was empty again. The silence he left behind was deafening. Ethan clung tighter to Clara's hand, his small voice breaking the quiet. Is he going to take you away? Clara knelt, brushing a tear from her cheek. No, sweetheart. Not unless I choose to go. And I don't. David watched her, admiration and fear colliding in his chest. She was fragile, yes, but beneath that fragility was steel. You stood your ground, he said quietly when Ethan slipped upstairs. I'm shaking, she admitted, her hands trembling. Everything he said about the money is true. I don't have anything of my own. I don't even know if I can survive without it. David stepped closer, his voice steady. You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone in this. Clara lifted her eyes, searching his. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. He hesitated, then spoke the promise Sarah had once asked of him. Because when my wife was dying, she made me promise that if I ever had the chance to help someone find their way back to themselves, I should take it. She said, That's what love really is. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. For the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to begin again. Okay. Chapter 4. Rebuilding. The confrontation with Lucas lingered in the air like smoke long after the roar of his engines faded. That night, Clara hardly slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the siding, made her wonder if he would return. But when morning came, it was not fear that greeted her first. It was the smell of coffee, the sound of Ethan's laughter, and sunlight pouring through curtains that felt, strangely, like safety. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel like she had to perform. She sat at the kitchen table in borrowed clothes, hair still damp from her shower, watching David pack Ethan's lunch for school. He did it with practiced clumsiness. Apple slices slightly uneven, sandwich wrapped with too much tape. But there was tenderness in every movement. Ethan wolfed down cereal and then tugged on his backpack. Before running out the door, he stopped in front of Clara. "You'll be here when I get home, right?" The question caught her off guard. A lump rose in her throat. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll be here." David met her eyes as the door closed behind his son. The unspoken question was there. For how long? That afternoon, David found Clara in the backyard. She stood by the overgrown garden, staring at the tangled weeds and broken trellises that had once been Sarah's pride. The winter sun lit her profile, highlighting the quiet ache in her face. "She loved this garden," David said, stepping beside her. "I couldn't bring myself to touch it after she died." Clara crouched, brushing her fingers against the frost-stiff soil. "My grandmother used to say gardens are about hope. You plant something now, not because you need it today, but because you believe in tomorrow." David studied her, hearing more than just nostalgia in her voice. "Do you know much about gardening?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "Enough to get my hands dirty." Something stirred inside him, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. "Then maybe we should start here, together." The next days blurred into a rhythm that felt unexpectedly natural. In the mornings, Clara walked Ethan to school, and in the afternoons they planned the garden. She sketched layouts on napkins, her eyes lighting up as she explained which flowers attracted butterflies, which herbs thrived in shade. Ethan listened as if she were revealing magic spells. David watched them from the porch one evening, his heart catching at the sound of their laughter. His son hadn't laughed like that in months. Clara, too, seemed lighter, her shoulders no longer drawn tight, her voice less careful, more alive. But reality pressed in soon enough. One evening, Clara sat across from David at the kitchen table, a stack of job listings between them. "I have to find something," she said. "I can't just depend on you, or on anyone." "You're not a burden," David said firmly. "I need to prove that," she replied, her fingers twisting the corner of a newspaper clipping. "To myself, most of all." She circled a posting for a part-time marketing assistant at a local nonprofit. "It's not glamorous, but it's something I can do." David smiled. "Then let's start there." Her first day at the nonprofit was awkward, but invigorating. The office was small, tucked above a bookstore on Market Street, but the team welcomed her warmly. She spent hours drafting social media posts, brainstorming slogans for an upcoming fundraiser. It wasn't the grand society galas she'd once been paraded through, but it was hers. And when she walked back to David's house that evening, cheeks flushed from the cold, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known in years. At dinner, Ethan chattered about his art project, while Clara described her day. The conversation flowed easily, like they had been a family forever. David listened quietly, his chest swelling with something he dared not name yet. One night, Clara joined David on the porch. The garden beds lay bare under the moonlight, their outlines traced in frost. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm terrified," she admitted softly, "of failing, of not knowing who I am without him. Without my parents, without the life I left." David's gaze stayed on the dark yard. "I'm terrified every day that I'm not enough for Ethan, that I'll say the wrong thing or miss something he needs. But I keep showing up anyway." She turned to him, eyes shimmering. "How?" "Love," he said simply. "Not perfect love, just steady love." They sat in silence, listening to the ocean's distant hush. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future. One with dirt under her fingernails, laughter in the kitchen, and a garden blooming outside her window. It wasn't the life her parents had chosen. It wasn't the gilded cage Lucas had offered. It was better. Because it was hers. Chapter 5. New Roots. Spring crept into Portsmouth with hesitant steps, the kind where one day frost glazed the windows, and the next day crocuses pushed defiantly through the thawing earth. For Clara, the change in seasons mirrored the change inside her. Each morning she rose earlier, walked Ethan to school, and returned to the small non-profit office, where her ideas were not only heard, but valued. Each evening, she came home to laughter over dinner, muddy shoes left by the back door, and the slow rebirth of the Miller garden. With David and Ethan, life felt real, messy, unpredictable, but honest. Yet shadows never linger far behind. It began with a letter slipped into the mailbox. Heavy stationery, her parents' crest stamped in gold. Clara found it one morning and nearly dropped it, her pulse quickening at the sight of the familiar seal. Inside, the words were polite but sharp. "Come home. We can still fix this. Lucas is willing to forgive. Stop embarrassing the family." Her hands shook as she read it. When David noticed, he gently took the letter from her fingers. He didn't speak right away. He only tore the paper cleanly in half, then into smaller pieces until it was nothing but confetti in the trash. "You don't have to answer them," he said softly. "But they won't stop," Clara whispered. "Then let them waste their energy," he replied. "Not yours." For the first time she realized she didn't feel guilt, only anger, and beneath that, a fragile but growing strength. Weeks later, strength was tested. The silver Bentley returned. It pulled into the driveway one Saturday afternoon, while Clara and Ethan knelt in the garden, planting roses in neat rows. David stepped out from the shed, dirt on his jeans, hammer in hand. The sight of Lucas Harrington stepping from the car made his shoulders tense. Lucas looked immaculate, as if he'd stepped straight out of a magazine cover. But his smile was brittle. "Still playing house?" he sneered, gaze flicking between Clara and David. Ethan edged closer to Clara, gripping her arm. She laid her hand protectively over his. "Lucas," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "you need to leave." "I came to give you one more chance," he said smoothly. "Your parents are devastated. You're living in a fantasy here. You belong in Boston, not digging in the dirt with—" His eyes slid to David. "People beneath you." David stiffened, but Clara's hand tightened on his arm before he could speak. She stepped forward, chin raised, eyes blazing. "No, Lucas. You don't get to decide where I belong. I am not an ornament for your world, not a pawn for my parents, and not a possession for anyone. This garden, this home, this is real. And I'd rather have dirt under my fingernails than diamonds chained around my neck." Lucas's mask cracked. "You'll regret this when you're penniless." Clara shook her head. "I'd rather start from nothing and build something true than live one more day in your gilded cage." The silence that followed was heavy. David finally spoke, voice calm but cutting. "You heard her. Leave." Lucas's jaw clenched. His gaze lingered on Clara, searching, perhaps for weakness, but found none. With a sharp turn, he slid back into the Bentley. The engine roared, the car reversed, and just like that, he was gone. The garden was silent, except for the wind. Clara exhaled shakily. Realizing her hands were still trembling, David touched her shoulder gently. "You didn't need me this time." She turned, tears shimmering in her eyes, not of fear, but of release. "No, I didn't." Ethan grinned suddenly, holding up a small paper sign he'd been coloring. In uneven letters it read, "Our garden, our home." He planted it proudly in the soil beside the roses. Clara laughed through her tears. For the first time in her life, she felt not just like she'd escaped, but that she'd rooted herself in the right place. That night, under the soft glow of porch lights, David poured 2 glasses of wine. They sat side by side, watching the garden beds they had tilled together. The soil smelled of rain and promise. "To new roots," David said, raising his glass. Clara clinked hers against his. "To finally belongin'." For the first time in years, the future didn't frighten her. It felt like a garden in bloom. Fragile, yes, but real. Chapter 6. A family in bloom. June came to Portsmouth draped in sunlight, the kind that lingered on rooftops well past supper and painted the harbor in liquid gold. By then, the Miller garden was alive again, rows of herbs sprouting defiantly, roses beginning to unfurl, and laughter echoing through the yard as Ethan chased butterflies with a net too small for his ambition. Clara stood at the edge of the garden, dirt smudged across her cheek, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her from the sun. She watched Ethan twirl, his laughter carrying on the warm air, and felt something stir deep in her chest. Not fear, not doubt. Something steadier. Something she had never thought she'd be allowed to feel. Belonging. David emerged from the shed with a tray of lemonade, setting it on the porch rail. He paused, taking in the sight of Clara laughing with Ethan, and realized how natural it all felt now, how her presence had folded seamlessly into the rhythms of their life. It no longer felt like she was a guest. It felt like she was home. That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Clara found David on the back porch. The garden stretched before them, glowing faintly under the moonlight. Fireflies winked in and out like tiny stars come down to earth. "I used to be terrified of silence," Clara admitted. "In Boston, it always meant judgment, that I'd said the wrong thing, that I wasn't enough. But here," she exhaled, eyes soft on the garden, "here, silence feels like peace." David studied her profile, the strength that had replaced fragility, the way she seemed to breathe easier now. "Clara," he said carefully, "I don't want to pressure you. I know you're still finding your way, but I need you to know something." She turned to him, waiting. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because I need to fill some empty space, and not because I expect you to be anyone but yourself. I love you, the way you listen to Ethan's stories, the way you fight for your own freedom, the way you've brought this house back to life." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but her smile trembled into place. "I love you too, David, but it terrifies me." "Then let's be terrified together," he said, reaching for her hand. "One day at a time." 3 weeks later, Ethan burst into the kitchen, clutching a drawing in both hands. "I finished it," he announced, cheeks flushed with excitement. It was a picture of the 3 of them, David, Clara, and Ethan, standing in front of the garden, flowers blooming wildly around them. At the bottom, in careful 9-year-old handwriting, he'd written, "My family is growing." Clara felt her throat tighten. She crouched to Ethan's height, pulling him into a fierce hug. "You're right," she whispered. "Our family is growing." David stood behind them, eyes glistening, and when Clara rose, he wrapped his arms around them both. For a moment, they stood together in the kitchen, the heart of the home beating strong again. That night, Clara spoke the words she had been holding on to. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady, "about what Ethan wrote, about families growing, and I want to grow with yours, if you'll have me." David's smile was radiant, the kind that melted years of grief into something new. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Clara said. "I want this life, not because I have to, but because I choose to." Ethan whooped with joy from the stairs, having overheard. "I told you, Dad." They laughed, and in that laughter, a chapter closed while another began. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the garden they had planted together. Roses climbed higher, herbs unfurled, and the soil thrummed with promise. Clara knelt beside Ethan, helping him pat soil around a young lavender plant, while David hammered the last piece of the trellis into place. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't glamour. It wasn't the life others had written for them. It was better. It was real. It was theirs. And as the garden bloomed, so did they. 3 souls who had known loss and loneliness, now bound by love, choice, and the courage to begin again. Every story leaves behind a lesson, and this one reminds us that true love isn't about wealth, titles, or appearances. It's about choice. The choice to stay, to rebuild, and to grow together even when the world tells you otherwise. Clara walked away from everything she thought she was supposed to be, only to discover something far more precious, a family that loved her for who she truly was. David opened his heart again, proving that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making space for new beginnings. And Ethan, with the innocence of a child, showed that sometimes the purest wisdom comes from the smallest voices. Just like a garden, life takes patience, courage, and care. What you plant today, kindness, love, trust, will bloom tomorrow in ways you could never imagine. If this story touched your heart, don't just let it end here. Subscribe to The Hidden Legacy and join us every week for more tales of resilience, romance, and second chances. Together, we'll uncover the hidden legacies that remind us all of what truly matters. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's keep growing these stories, one chapter at a time.